Hey there, this is Ragnon, and this is my guide for Discipline Priest in Mythic Plus for patch 10.1.7. Now, I know that this guide is coming out pretty late in the season, and patch 10.2 is right around the corner with some big changes for Disc, but I've had some people asking for this guide, and I want to get it out there so that people who might be considering re-rolling to Disc Priest can have it as a resource as they prepare their characters in the meantime. Why play Priest? Priest is a versatile healer with 2 healing specs, allowing it to flow with different balance patches and to have lots of options for encounters. This gives you a high quality of life as a healer main, meaning that you can essentially gear 2 healers within one character, and swap between Disc and Holy for either the stronger choice, or just to keep things fresh and interesting. Power Infusion is a coveted external buff, giving haste to you and another party member, and essentially it can be considered extra damage that you bring to a group beyond just your normal damage. While this is getting a nerf in patch 10.2, until its functionality is completely removed from the game, it will remain a strong consideration for including Priest in a group. Power Word Fortitude is a buff that you give as a Priest, and it increases your group's health. While it's a mandatory buff in raid groups, it's also helpful when pushing high Mythic Plus keys because it gives you the health needed to survive mechanics that might otherwise one-shot you. Priest isn't without its downsides, and can be a slow and vulnerable class, and can require some extra effort to survive. Priest lacks displacement effects, and deals with mobility largely through Angelic Feather, and to a lesser extent Body and Soul, which is applied by your Power Word Shield when you have that talent selected. Goblin is a popular race choice for Priest due to Rocket Jump being so nice for mobility, and I can say that after swapping to Goblin recently, I'd have a hard time swapping back. Priest has fairly weak defensive tools compared to other classes, but with intentional use, their defensive toolkit can do the job just fine. Why play Disc? Disc Priest is one of the few specs that heals by dealing damage, with its primary healing tool being Atonement. Breaking away from the traditional caster-healer playstyle, this creates an engaging playstyle that allows a player to play more like a DPS, focusing on their damage output and cooldowns more than other healers might. Disc Priest requires more dungeon knowledge than other healers, as it requires some setup time before you can actually start healing. This can be very satisfying, as you can see your plan to heal the group through certain mechanics unfold right before you. Stat Priority. As Disc Priest heals through dealing damage, stats that increase that damage are the priority. Disc Priest is fortunate in that it has a similar stat priority for both Raid and Mythic Plus, giving it a high quality of life when gearing early in the season. In Mythic Plus, our stat priority is Haste, then Crit, then Versatility, and finally Mastery is our worst stat since it doesn't contribute to damage. Haste is most important as it smooths out our rotation by allowing us to apply our atonements quicker, which in turn allows us to fit in more damaging abilities before the atonements begin to expire. Crit is the next most important because it increases the effectiveness of our spells, and since the majority of our damage comes from a key few abilities, the stronger these abilities are, the better. Versatility can be nice for the survivability it adds, but it doesn't scale quite as well as Crit does for damage. Versatility is not as important for Disc Priest in Mythic Plus as it is for Holy Priest, in my opinion, as you'll have very frequent self-healing through Atonement, and you have pain suppression and shields, tools for your own survival that Holy Priest doesn't have. Versatility shouldn't be avoided, however, so having a good amount of both Crit and Verse on your gear can be nice for Mythic Plus, whereas focusing mostly on just Haste and Crit will serve you better in Raid, making it a nice all-in-one stat priority. Gear. Our tier is currently quite strong, and it adds good quality of life changes as well. Our 2-piece increases the damage of Purge the Wicked by 25%, which will be our biggest damage dealer over the course of a dungeon, and it increases the healing of Power Word Radiance by 15%, making it an increasingly strong tool to respond to emergency damage that you might not have been prepared for. Our 4-piece makes our atonements applied by Radiance last 3 seconds longer, and gives our spells the chance to proc a buff that gives us an instant cast Radiance for half mana cost. This proc stacks up to 2 times, and the buff doesn't expire, allowing you to save it for when you need it most. The combined result of our tier set increases our damage greatly, significantly decreases our mana expenditure, and makes Power Word Radiance both an effective emergency healing tool as well as a method of applying Atonement. Talents. The class talent page will largely stay the same, with slight variations depending on dungeon needs and weekly affixes. Talents that affect dungeons and affixes are Improved Purify, Improved Mass Dispel, Phantasm, Dominate Mind, and Power Word Life. I just keep all of these talents selected so I don't accidentally forget to swap for a dungeon. An exception to this is Shackle and Dead, which I grab on incorporeal weeks but otherwise leave untalented. If you want, you can make small optimizations by dropping any number of these talents if not needed for that particular dungeon or affix week, and grab other talents like Spell Warding, Words of the Pious, Crystalline Reflection, and Improved Fade. On the spec talent tree, there's a decent amount of flexibility due to many of our capstone options being fairly weak, with the exception being Twilight Equilibrium. Most players run builds with Twilight Equilibrium, or TE for short, due to it providing a near permanent 15% extra damage, although it does make the spell rotation a bit more strict and challenging, and requires some practice to get used to. That group of 4 talents leading up to TE is the most powerful section of our tree, and stays the same for most builds. Harsh Discipline makes it so that after you cast 4 smites, your next penance shoots 3 extra bolts and costs no mana, which makes it a much stronger button now. You want to always aim to have Harsh Discipline stacked before casting penance. This isn't always possible, but it should be your goal. Expiation is another strong talent in that section of the tree, causing your Mind Blast and Shadow Word Death to deal 20% extra damage and consume 6 seconds of your Purge the Wicked dot, immediately dealing that damage. This makes Mind Blast and Shadow Word Death extremely potent, especially when cast during the damage amps of Schism and Shadow Covenant. The flexibility in our talent tree comes from what second capstone you want to grab. The majority of players seem to currently be running Aegis of Wrath, due to it making Rapture a button that's actually worth pushing. Another popular choice is dropping Aegis of Wrath and Divine Aegis to grab Blaze of Light and Power Word Solace. This gives you more overall consistent throughput by permanently increasing the damage of Solace, Smite, and Penance by 15%, which means better Atonement healing. Solace also gives another instant cast Holy Spell, which can smooth out your rotation during Shadow Covenant. A third and final talent build choice is Mindbender, which is commonly referred to as the Squid build. This shortens Shadow Fiend to a 1-minute cooldown, causes many of your abilities to reduce its cooldown even more, bringing it down to around a 30-second cooldown, and makes your Mind Blast and Shadow Word Death cause the Mindbender to teleport to your target and deal a large amount of AoE damage, and increasing the duration of your active Mindbender. These builds are very fun and deal a lot of damage, but they aren't currently the meta choice, so I won't be covering it much in this guide. Atonement. Atonement is the primary method through which Disc Priest heals, so it's important to understand it well. Atonement is a discipline-only effect that's applied to players that are healed by Power Word Shield, Renew, Flash Heal, or Power Word Radiance. Atonement heals affected players for a percentage of all damage that you do from priest abilities. This damage is not increased or decreased by extra modifiers, such as damage amp phases, or 99% damage reduction transitions that bosses sometimes have. As long as your target is not completely immune to damage, you'll get full value out of your Atonement healing. External damage, such as damage dealt by trinkets, does not factor into Atonement healing. Schism and Shadow Covenant, however, are important damage amps that do contribute to Atonement healing, which we'll go over into greater depth later in the video. AoE spells like Halo, Divine Star, and Holy Nova only apply Atonement healing from the damage applied to the first target hit, making them fairly weak for Atonement healing. An exception to this is Holy Nova when Rhapsody is fully stacked to 20, which hits like a truck, and it has the added benefit of also providing a lot of natural healing to any party members that might be within range too. Between Halo and Divine Star, Halo seems to be the more popular choice due to having higher initial damage application to the first target it hits, giving it more Atonement healing than Divine Star. Divine Star deals a pretty meaningless amount of damage to the first target hit, giving it very low Atonement healing, but it is a very easy button to push since it's an instant cast, and it can contribute a lot of damage over the course of a dungeon since it only has a 15-second cooldown, making it a viable choice as well. Ramping. The concept of a ramp is not unique to Discipline Priest, but Disc has arguably been the quintessential ramping healer for a long time now. Ramping essentially means casting several abilities leading up to a damage event, so you're prepared to heal when the damage hits. Disc Priest ramps by applying atonements to party members, so they're ready to heal by dealing damage when players begin to take damage. This means that Disciplined Priest benefits more than other healers from knowing dungeons and damage patterns well, so that they aren't caught by surprise. Disc Priest is able to efficiently dish out incredible amounts of healing in small windows, but can struggle to respond to unpredictable damage outside of these windows. As a result, Disciplined Priest finds increasingly good value in competent groups that can dodge avoidable damage, allowing the healer to focus their attention on healing the unavoidable damage in planned windows. I just want to take a quick moment to say that if you're enjoying this guide and if you're looking for more healer content, please consider liking and subscribing as it helps me out a lot. Also consider checking out my Twitch and community Discord, which you can find linked in the description. Shadow Covenant. A firm understanding of Shadow Covenant windows will make or break your performance as a Disc Priest. The entire spec essentially revolves around using these windows effectively to provide huge bursts of damage and subsequently healing. Shadow Covenant is an instant cast and lasts for 15 seconds with my recommended talent build, and has a 30-second cooldown. This essentially gives it up to a 50% uptime, so it should be used frequently unless you have a very intentional reason to be saving it. During this window, shadow spells deal 25% additional damage, and several spells are converted from holy to shadow spells, including Penance, Halo, and Divine Star. In short, the goal during Shadow Covenant is to cast as many of your high-priority shadow spells as possible, generating incredible amounts of atonement healing. These high-priority shadow spells are Schism, Dark Reprimand with Harsh Discipline stacked, Mind Blast, Halo or Divine Star, and Shadow Word Death if the target is within execute range, or if you're running the Squid build. In order to fit as many of these spells within Shadow Covenant as possible, it's helpful to have a set rotation that you have practiced and can do without thinking about it from the moment that you press Shadow Covenant. Everyone plays this differently, but here's the rotation that I've found to feel very smooth. It fully benefits from Twilight Equilibrium by alternating between Shadow and Holy spells, and I've found some really good success with it. Basic Shadow Covenant rotation. Start by casting Smites to fully stack Harsh Discipline, and make sure that Purge the Wicked is applied to your target. The duration on Purge the Wicked doesn't matter much, as you'll be refreshing it early in the rotation. After stacking Harsh Discipline, apply Atonements to the group. If things are calm, I usually apply long Atonements by casting Power Word Shield on the first DPS, then renew the other 2 DPS, and finish by Flash Healing on the tank, which also applies it to me too because of Binding Heals. This makes sure that the last Atonements to fall off are the ones that are on me and the tank, which are the most vital team members to keep alive. If I'm panicked or late, I start with a Power Word Radiance instead, and just plan to reapply Atonements with a second Radiance halfway through Shadow Covenant. Next, cast Shadow Covenant, then Schism. Next, I use a Purge the Wicked and Dark Reprimand, which is the shadow name for Penance for anyone who's newer to the spec, and I use these instant cast spells to give me time to run into melee range. Next is Holy Nova, which should have 20 stacks of Rhapsody at this point. This is an AoE spell, but as we went over earlier in the video, it hits very hard with Rhapsody and provides a large amount of atonement healing. Next is Halo, then alternate Smite, Mind Blast, Smite, Mind Blast in order to fully recharge Harsh Discipline. Finally, we cast either Purge the Wicked or Solace in order to cast a Holy spell, and then we end with our second Dark Reprimand. This combo fits 2 Harsh Disciplines, 2 Mind Blasts, Halo, and Holy Nova with full stacks, and I like how easily this rotation allows you to get into melee range before Holy Nova with the 2 back-to-back instant casts. This combo also allows enough time to fit in 1 Atonement Fresh if needed, ideally with an instant cast Radiance. I've seen other content creators online show some combos that fit in more Mind Blasts and Shadow Word Deaths, but these combos don't seem to be running Twilight Equilibrium and don't require weaving in holy spells. Cooldown modifiers. Shadow Covenant windows can be bolstered by pairing it with another cooldown. A lengthy tyrannical boss might require you to intentionally spread these cooldowns so that you have a modifier for every Shadow Covenant. An example of how I might do this would be Rapture plus Shadow Covenant, then Shadow Fiend plus Shadow Covenant, then Barrier plus Shadow Covenant, and finally a second Rapture plus Shadow Covenant. Assuming that you were needing to use Shadow Covenant on cooldown, this would ensure that every single Shadow Covenant would have an additional modifier over the course of a 2-minute fight. In reality, you'll likely have more time in between each Shadow Covenant, or you could go without a modifier when supported by another team member's utility, such as a Vampiric Embrace or Ancestral Guidance. Maintenance healing. Outside of Shadow Covenant windows, maintenance healing will be done using Atonement. Focus on maintaining your dots, spreading dots with Penance, and weaving through Mind Blast, Smite, Purge the Wicked, Solace, Divine Star, and Shadow Word Death in order to benefit from Twilight Equilibrium. If one player is taking a disproportionate amount of damage, usually through a bleed like a Dragonbone Axe in Neltharis, don't be afraid to defensively direct heal the target with Power Word Shield, Penance, and Flash Heal. Atonement healing outside of Shadow Covenant is largely for small, unavoidable group damage and tank healing. With our current tier set, Power Word Radiance has also become a very strong reactionary healing tool, healing the whole group for a large amount of health and also applying Atonement. Feel free to use these liberally, but be careful, as getting caught without a Radiance charge when you need it can be very deadly. I opt to do long Atonements with Power Word Shield, Renew, and Flash Heal when things are calm, and I save my instant cast Radiances for emergencies, or to refresh Atonements during Shadow Covenant. Cooldowns. Disc Priest sports several cooldowns, allowing them to spread them out over the course of an encounter. These cooldowns are usually paired with Shadow Covenant, as I went over earlier, and act as an extra modifier to boost the strength of Shadow Covenant windows. Our first and most frequently used cooldown is Rapture, which increases the strength of applied Power Word shields and gives it no cooldown during its duration, allowing you to cast Power Word shields back to back. This is unfortunately a much weaker cooldown than it's felt in the past, but running Aegis of Wrath builds makes it a much more reliable tool by increasing the shield values by up to an additional 30%. Rapture isn't an incredible active healing tool unless you're running an Aegis build, as its HPS is pretty low for the amount of globals spent. Instead, Rapture is usually used as a strong method of applying long atonements before a Shadow Covenant window. However, when running an Aegis of Wrath build, Rapture has potential to move into a standalone cooldown. Power Word Barrier is a strong damage reduction tool for the entire group, but it does require players to stack. A good way to use this would be as an extra modifier to Shadow Covenant, giving additional safety to the melee and tank as a minimum. As a squishy priest, you can also throw this down on yourself in a pinch as a survival cooldown, and other observant ranged players will usually come and stand in it too. Shadow Fiend is an underrated cooldown, especially for a 3-minute cooldown. Shadow Fiend can be used as an additional modifier with Shadow Covenant to provide a large amount of extra atonement healing, with the added benefit of being completely passive. This means that even if you have to move and cancel your casts, the group will still be receiving healing from the Shadow Fiend's attacks. Shadow Fiend also provides a good amount of mana regeneration over the course of a key, so you want to make sure that you're using it in a way that it's not chasing down a moving mob and it can attack for its full duration. And that's going to do it for this video. If you have any questions, please hit me up in the comments, as I check it very frequently and will reply as quickly as I can. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and remember to check the description for links to my community Discord, where you can find announcements and priest discussion, and check out my Twitch channel, Ragnon Gaming, where I stream our Mythic raids every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. Mountain Time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.